another one, you bastard!
Brought to you by supporters who probably have better taste than this schmuck.
Sandwiched between reinvention and refinement lies a dimension of pure chaos. It's a world where the simplest of tasks are required, yet somehow fall flat. In the pursuit of accuracy, a figure is drained of all personality and color breakup, and is then further crippled by a terrifying peg breakage. The greatest vehicle mode of all time is conceived, only to be tarnished with the laziness of parts forming. A dream project commences, reviving a character that could make a brilliant update, but the designers never afforded it the attention it deserved, and it was lost in the mists of mediocrity. You're about to enter this world, so hold on tight to your sanity. You're about to enter the Earthrise dimension. In the twilight of a global pandemic, a sad, little pathetic man ponders about his place in the universe. The world is finally kicking into gear again, in spite of the efforts of the COVIDiots. Freedom is finally afforded to the majority of the population, but little does he know that his own freedom has been taken from him in a manner he can seldom comprehend.
Yo!
Yo.
So, rough day?
Yep. Feels like the world's rushing back into place. Everywhere I look, it's just everything's on fast forward now that everything's opened up.
Oof, must be plain hell with your schedule.
Pretty much, but what can you do?
Jesus Christ. Well, good luck.
Thanks, mate. Wait, what did you just say?
Good luck.
No, before that, you said Jesus Christ. You never say that.
So how long is this ride gonna take?
Well, considering we're going interstate, about 8 hours.
Jesus Crips.
And this? What is this? I don't drink alcohol. I've never had a sip in my life. Haha! That wasn't whiskey. It was apple juice with red food dye all along. You've been bamboozled. And why are you here? You shouldn't even be here. Could you please use your wizard magic to... Why did I expect anything else? And this place shouldn't even be here anyway. You know, Vaughn, you'd better start... I don't know what kind of f***ery I've gotten myself into, but I refuse to take part in it. Well, after this, I'm probably gonna have to beat the shit out of Quartz for getting me into this mess, but whatever. Here we go!
When it comes to making videos, I always try to write reviews based on figures that have some sort of unique attributes. For me, it's not just about saying whether something is good or bad. I think Kingdom Scorponok is a piece of garbage. I think Pseudo Series 86 Grimlock is amazing. See, I can say that, and I can even explain why, but it doesn't necessarily make for a good video. I much prefer writing about intriguing topics that touch on the way the fandom operates, the history behind a specific figure, or even my own personal journey throughout collecting. One line that always remains easy to talk about is Earthrise. No matter the figure, there's always something I can delve deeper into. I'm constantly finding myself flip-flopping between putting it to rest for fear of this show getting stale and taking another stab at it for one last hurrah. However, this video isn't going to be like those other reviews. This isn't a tale of a figure that's failed to live up to its potential through warped priorities, or even one that ends up surprisingly endearing amongst the mountains of shit. This is a set that overcomes an almost insurmountable obstacle and does things I never would have expected it to. Greetings, Cybertronians, I'm DrLockdown, and today's diagnosis pertains to the Hasbro PulseCon 2020 Earthrise Quintesson Pit of Judgement. On paper, this set might seem like a bad idea. A barely changed re-release, a redeco of an already boring mold, an outdated Legends figure that's soon to be replaced, and two fairly undersized representations of characters fans have admittedly wanted for a while. It seems like a recipe for disaster. Honestly though, this turns out better than expected. Of course, we'll probably have to tackle these in order from smallest to largest, so let's head on over to the little guys first. At first glance, it might seem a little disappointing that these two are this small. I mean, these things are pretty goddamn tiny. Not master small, but definitely not following the old Sunbowy, Blunderblowy chart. That being said, sure, Transformers fans might be down for these, but general consumers? Honestly doubt it. And yes, this is a box set aimed at fans of the franchise, but they don't really have anything to retool them from. They can't really release any of these at general retail after all. So as far as representation goes, this is probably the best we're ever going to get outside of whatever X-Transbots is cooking up. Personally though, representation isn't something I'm too fussed about. I'm just taking these as they come, and for the most part, they're pretty decent. Simon Blackwell over here is definitely the more surprising of the two, featuring a lot more detail than he has any right to. For all intents and purposes, this is an accessory, yet they went way harder than what was required. Now, full disclosure, he is supposed to have a blast effect slash stand under here, but unfortunately I've lost it. If you're getting angry about me losing accessories prior to making a review, you must be new here. That aside, the detail on this is absolutely phenomenal. The chest is covered in 80s space age greebles, looking like something straight out of the Doctor Who prop department reject pile. It's covered in paint too, sure, the red's a bit messy, but since this is basically just an accessory, I can't get too mad. And hey, the silver's pretty clean at least. The skull is also really well painted, with wonderful green breakup on the sides and enough ribs to make those 1.5 kilo challenges seem like child's play. Sadly though, the face is a little warped. The eyes are off center, and there are really ugly mold marks on show. I'm not sure if this is a mileage may vary QC type of thing or something that affects all copies, but either way, it's really the only thing I can criticize. You tend not to notice though thanks to the really well detailed tentacles, all covered in lumps and mechanical armbands. Seriously, whoever sculpted this thing deserves a raise, or a firing if they happen to use Schmentai as a reference. This kind of figure really surprises at every turn, and will do wonderfully as a novelty piece for the shelf. I mean, Christ, they even painted the back of the figure. Don't know what I was expecting with this, but it wasn't anything on this level. When it comes to Kranix from accounting though, my expectations were pretty easily met. I'll give them this, it's just as detailed as Barock von Zeke's, perhaps even more so. If it were a little bit bigger, I probably could have examined the greebles properly, although given budgets and obscurity, I'm not going to hold this size against him. My main issue is the paint. Not that it's got too little, but rather that it's got too much. The plastic is coated from head to toe in a sort of sand with a pink tinge glossy finish.